Welcome, warriors. Today's story is a love story, one without your typical Hollywood or fairy tale ending. It's a true love story. Our guest, Paulette Ren, made vows like most brides of for better or for worse, and in sickness or in health. But like most brides, she wasn't focused on part of each of those vows until she had to be. Grab a tissue and listen in as Paulette shares what she learned during her marriage. Let's rock.
Does your past haunt you? Maybe you're in a storm that feels like it will never end. Are you fighting a battle that's rendering you hopeless? Maybe you feel like you're fighting alone, but your battle was not meant to be a solo endeavor. You were meant to be a warrior among warriors. My name is Heather, and I grew up thinking my battles were nobody's business until I found myself in an abusive marriage and felt cut off from all avenues of help. In this podcast, you will hear warriors' words. They will tell you of their battles, both won and lost, their journeys, and their lessons learned along the way. But we don't stop there. These warriors will share how they have applied those lessons to go from warrior to survivor to thriver. Whether it's an abusive marriage, illness, mental health crisis, or any number of traumas this world dishes out, these warriors will use their words to help you find the beauty in your broken, move beyond your battles, and become the thriver God created you to be. Pick up your sword or boxing gloves and join the battle. Your words are powerful, my friends. Make them warrior words.
Welcome back to the Warrior Words podcast. I am excited to share Paulette's story with you. This is one that so many of us encounter, but we're really not prepared for it. So it's our hope that her story today can help us all with that preparation, even if it's just a little bit. But before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about Paulette Ren. Paulette is a first-time author. She is a widow and retired from Delta Airlines. She loves to cook, golf, read, and travel. She lives in Draper, Utah, where she is close to her 3 children and her 9 grandchildren. Now, before we move on to Paulette's experiences, here is a review from the Beauty Hunters podcast. You are not alone. Heather's authenticity and stories really gather you in. She inspires you to thrive in any and all circumstances in life. Tune in and find breakthrough on the other side. Thank you, Beauty Hunter. I love sharing stories to inspire others in whatever journey of life they're currently in. Would you like me to read your review on an upcoming episode of the podcast? Please go to Apple Podcasts and leave your review for the show. Your comments and your star ratings help people find the Warrior Words podcast, and it only takes a few minutes of your time. Thank you. Would you like to become a Warrior Words insider and be the first to know about all the Warrior Words podcast news? You can sign up at subscribepage.io/pearls of wisdom. Now, on to the show. Hi, everyone. As you heard, we are blessed to have Paulette Ren here with us today. And Paulette's going to share her story. So welcome, Paulette, to the Warrior Words podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm just really happy to be here with you together.
Thank you. I do appreciate your time. So this episode is going to air in June, and June is traditionally considered one of the most popular wedding months. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to have you on so that you could share with our listeners your love story. And I would feel safe in saying that most of us approach our wedding day with more anticipation and joy, and we think more about the better rather than the worse, or the health rather than the sickness. And so I guess my first question to you then would be, was that true for you? And if you could share a little bit about your love story with us.
Okay. My husband and I met in Pocatello, Idaho, which is where I grew up. He was on a job working there, and we just kind of hit it off right up front. And we dated for about 8 months, is all, and then we got married. And we both were Catholics. We got married in the Catholic Church. And right after our reception, we went to Fullerton, California. So we lived there for about a year or so. And then we moved back to Utah, which is where my husband was from. And we just had a really good life going for us. We were very active. We liked to ski and golf and boat and water ski and do a lot of the outside things, which I hadn't been accustomed to some of those, but I learned real fast if you read my book, that I learned how to do those things with him. But we just had a really good connection. And life went on for a long time, just being, happy. We were just doing getting used to being married and having fun and all the good stuff. And when my husband was about 30 years old, kind of in the prime of his life,
Right.
he started having issues and eventually was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And of course, that was a big shock to us because, we had no idea that what it was even. Of course, back then, we didn't have a lot of easy access to computers to find out, but we started reading everything we could and doing everything that sounded logical to try to help him to get strong again. And at first it was hard because he went, I don't know, maybe a year or so where he was really up and down with different symptoms. And then after a period of time, he went into remission. And when he was in remission, he was able to do the things he'd always done, which made it very, very good for us. We were very happy that he could do them. Maybe not in quite the capacity he did before.
Okay.
But he still was able to go skiing and golfing and that. And so our life, we had a very, very good life. Everything kind of was around how he was, if he was feeling okay. We planned lots of activities. We traveled a lot. And it was just one of those things where this is the way it is. This is what has happened. And we had to learn to accept our circumstances.
Right.
And that's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today, because so many people are in denial, especially when they're first diagnosed with a disease. And it's like, you can't believe, is this really happening to me?
Right.
And why, and, there's so many stories out there. And it took me a long time to really totally accept that. But one day I just thought, this is the way our life is. We've got to figure out how we can be as happy as we can be and make life wonderful. And at that time, when, we didn't have our children till, when he was first diagnosed, we had our first boy.
Right.
And the second one 2 years later. And of course, those brought absolutely wonderful joy to our life.
They do, yes.
Yeah, and I did have a daughter before them. But anyway, my kids were very, very good and very, very supportive. And once one thing I found important is you've got to learn to talk about it. And most people don't even want to think about it. But you need to be honest and open with each other and try to do what you can to make your life good. And so accepting what has happened is the very number one first thing I found. After that, then you have to learn to be positive and hopeful and try to do the best that you can do. And a lot of people will just go in a funk, get depressed, do nothing, and basically give up. And that breaks my heart when I hear that, because it's just very, very important to keep going. And you have to keep busy. You have to keep your life just like you normally would. Some things may be slower. Some things may not be quite like you want them to be, but you learn to live with that. And those are some of the big things I learned. And
Well, you mentioned remission,
Mhm.
and how long did the remission
Well, the one thing that I found with our situation is things kind of come and go. Like you never completely lose all of the symptoms that you have. With MS, you can have trouble walking, you can have trouble with your eyes, you can have trouble with your voice,
last?
numbness, a lot of different kinds of symptoms.
Okay.
And you can go along and actually you learn to live with them. You get to a point where they're not as painful or not as bad. Of course, when my husband was diagnosed too, they didn't have all the meds and research we have now. Nowadays,
Right,
it's
right,
absolutely phenomenal what they can do. I mean, they
right.
have
Because you mentioned he was
wonderful,
30. 'Cause he
yeah,
was 30, and I'm not going to ask you what your age is now, but we know that it's been a little bit.
it's been a little bit.
It's been a little bit.
Uh,
So yeah.
so anyway, but when he was going remission, he would be pretty much normal. I
Mhm.
mean, there were days where you didn't even think that he was sick.
Right.
And the one thing I think probably the hardest thing is when you have MS, you get extremely tired, not
Right.
just a little bit fatigued, but you're exhausted. And so what he did when he was in remission and he was still able to work at that point in time again, he would come home and he'd take a nap before dinner, and that seemed to help him through the rest of the day. And with remission, I have to say, overall, there wasn't a lot of episodes and things that went on during that period of time. In
Mhm.
his case, he was really in remission for about 22 years.
Oh, well, that was a blessing then.
Yeah, it
Yes.
was absolutely a blessing because it definitely made a difference in our lives. Because we could still do things. We just
Mhm.
we just had to plan a little better, and we just had to you know, uh, look a little bit ahead and see what we can do and not do. And so remission was a wonderful thing. Some people are very, very fortunate, and some people, unfortunately, that doesn't happen to as easily. But I think what part of it was the fact that we really tried to eat healthy. He exercised. I mean, we took, vitamins, we did juicing, we did all
Yes.
kinds of things that you hear about. And I don't know if over a period of time that just made the difference, but we were very fortunate in that sense.
Oh, yeah, I think it's important. I mean, it's important in general to start to be healthy, but especially when there's a disease involved.
Mhm.
The sleep, the healthy foods, the exercise, they all help to make life at least a little bit easier during
Exactly,
those times. Yeah.
exactly.
Okay. So what
And
happened?
no, go
Okay.
ahead. No, go ahead.
So what happened when you said the remission lasted about 22 years? What started to happen after that?
Well, about the last, I'd say 3 years of his life, he started getting pretty bad symptoms again. And they
Mhm.
came on slowly. So, they weren't just like all of a sudden, but he would slowly start having trouble walking. And then he started having trouble with his eyes. And he started getting, more numbness and stuff. And over the last 3 years, we were pretty much not as active as
Right.
we had been, of course, because we were trying to help him to do what we can. And by help, I meant my family, my
Mhm.
children.
Mhm.
And he eventually had to be in a hospital bed. And well, just before that, he was sleeping in our basement, which was always cooler and a little more quiet one day.
Right.
And I could hear him screaming, and I went down, and he'd fallen out of bed and broke his hip.
Oh no.
And after his surgery and going through rehab, it wasn't very long after that he became paralyzed from the neck
Mm.
down. So he
Wow.
couldn't move anything except his head. And that was in the last 3 years of his life. And it was very hard because his mind was as sharp as could be. I mean, he knew everything was going on. He was a very smart guy anyway, and it was really hard. But we eventually, we just kept doing everything we could do, you know, along with help from the doctors and whatever. He eventually had to go into a hospital bed. And after a period of time, he kept getting a lot of infections. And we'd be in and out of the hospital with those. And it got to a point where his body just couldn't fight anything off. And so we went to the doctor at this one point in time, and he said, there's nothing else I can do for him. So I figured we should put him on hospice. And so we did. And he lived 8 months after being put on hospice. But he had a very strong heart, and he didn't want to go. He didn't want to go. You know, it was hard. But that changed our life because I knew at that point in time, you know, we had to plan even more so for the future.
Right.
And at that point, I was working for Delta Airlines, which I had gotten that job several years before so that I'd have good benefits, have health benefits and whatnot in case, you know. And so I would go to work, and I worked midnights a lot, and my children, my 3 children would each take a night. They would come over and help him with dinner, get him ready for bed, and they'd talk to him or read to him or sing to him or whatever. So they got to spend some real quality time with him alone.
What a blessing.
And that was just wonderful. And he loved it. He loved it. And just about, let's see, just about, well, my daughter ended up adopting a beautiful little girl in 1998. And Bob, he died in 1999. So he did get to see one of his grandchildren. And I used to tend her a lot. They'd bring her over. So what I would do is I would take her and put him in his arms, and he would take a nap with her.
Oh.
And it was so beautiful. And he got to share that. And every week he'd say, is it time? Is it time for Emma to come over? You know, it was so cute, so cute. And so we just made his life as simple as we could. We, you know, in my book, I tell a lot about that I used to read to him, and we'd go for walks in his wheelchair around, and he really enjoyed that. And one thing I can say, he never complained.
Wow.
You know,
Yeah.
it was amazing to me because there were days where I knew he was very sick, and he never complained. But we took very good care of him between my kids and our families. Their families, they all were very, very helpful.
Well, that's a testament to the acceptance that you talked about earlier, because you described a man who was very vibrant and active and, you know, just very much involved in outdoor sports and activities. And to go from that to being in a hospital bed because you're paralyzed.
Yeah.
You
That's true.
have to have that acceptance in order to keep your mind that sharp and to have that will to live.
Yeah, you really do, because if you don't, you just will wallow away and who knows where, you know, and that includes the whole family. But everybody, you know, we just realized this is what we have to do, and everybody did it. And you know, it was helpful to me because I could still work. And there were days when, you know, I was pretty burned out. I didn't know if I was going to make
Yeah.
it. You know, it gets pretty tiring.
Yes.
It went very, very well. And I'm just very, very grateful. I feel very blessed that I've had my 3 beautiful children and how helpful they've been to me.
It sounds that way. Now, I have read the book that you have mentioned a couple times. And one of the things that I like to talk about is finding beauty in the broken and being able to thrive after a traumatic event, or like in this case, a long traumatic illness, excuse me.
Yeah.
And one of the scenes in the book that really touched me was a final trip that you all took. Can you,
Yeah.
well, let me ask you this. Do you mind describing that for people who haven't read the book?
Yeah, no problem. My husband was Italian, and very proud of his heritage. And he always wanted to go to Italy. And so this happened it was just after we came back from Italy that all this started getting worse. So we got my two sons, and I took him to Italy. My daughter was in nursing school at the time, so she couldn't go. And we flew into Rome, and we went all over Rome. And of course, we went to the Vatican, which was just, you're kind of in awe, especially being Catholic, and everything is so beautiful. The Sistine Chapel and St. Peter's Basilica, and then they're so gorgeous. And he didn't want to be in a wheelchair. He could still walk a little bit, but if you've ever been to Europe, you'll know you walk a lot. So it made it so we could do it, And we went there, and he was just in awe, and he was so thrilled. And it wasn't the towns. We didn't get to go to the towns like where his ancestors were born, but just being in Italy and all the wonderful food, and they're so friendly over there. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. So that meant a lot to him. And then once we came home, that's kind of when he slowly started going downhill more. So I was very, very grateful that we got to do that.
I thought that story, and then the story you also mentioned about your granddaughter sleeping in his arms. Those were, I think, the two stories that just made me tear up.
Well, fortunately, I took a lot of pictures, and so I have all these wonderful pictures of him holding her, and he would just be like smiling. He'd be so happy, and that's all he needed at that time. He was just thrilled to death, and so that meant a lot to us, so.
Well, then why don't you take a moment and tell everybody about your book, what it's called, and if you can, I'm sure you probably have a copy nearby, and you could show us
Okay.
your cover.
Before I tell you about the book, let me just,
Sure.
Okay. Before I tell you about, let me just tell you one other little thing about,
Sure.
Once he passed, I said to myself, I am not going to sit around and be a grumpy old lady. I am not going to do that. I'm not going to be negative and awful and sit around and be grumpy for me or for my kids. And so one thing I had to do, and I think it's a big thing for people, you've got to still be busy and figure out what you want to do. I mean, you need your time of rest and your time of grief, and I get all that. And I did that too. I mean, I took off work and everything for a while.
Right.
But at the time, I just, I tried everything I could to keep busy. And unfortunately, my children all live in the same town, not far from me. So that helped a lot because I could see them. Always had them if I got lonely or if I needed a hug or something, and they were wonderful for that. And so that was one thing. I just wanted you to know that your attitude is as important as their attitude. So if you're going to be the caregiver, and it's not easy, I would never say it is, because there's always things that need to be done. But if you can keep your mood up and just try to be positive as possible and do the best you can, life will go on. It's like you can choose to be sad today or happy. And we really need to be happy. And that doesn't mean you don't have a day that you want to go in and close the door and not talk to anybody. And that's okay. That's okay. You do what is good for you. So to my book.
Yes.
This is my book. And it's called Stolen Moments, Coping with Loss from Multiple Sclerosis.
It's a beautiful cover. I love it.
Thank you. And I had always wanted to write a book. I've never been a writer, really, just, journaling, a few different things. But I always wanted to write a book. And I always had these things in my mind of what happened throughout our marriage, just little incidences of different things. And I thought, well, I bet the kids would enjoy this. So I started out writing it thinking I'd just do it for my family. because it was kind of, a walk down memory lane in a way.
Mhm.
And then as I started thinking about it, I thought, well, maybe somebody could get some inspiration out of this. Maybe they can
Yes.
realize you've got to be hopeful. You've got to keep trying. You've got to be in life. You just have to.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of what I did. I kind of, it actually took me probably a couple of years to get it actually written, but I started taking classes and eventually I got the drift of it and started, learning how to do the things you're supposed to do.
Right,
And
right.
so I wrote it, and I was very, very pleased with myself when I finally got it done. I thought, I can't believe I really did this. And,
Yeah, you
it's my
did.
first book. Who knows what will happen next? But I've been very grateful that I've been able to do it. And I'm with the Author Ready group, which is how I met you. And
Yes, yes.
so a lot of the people that were there at the beginning have kind of gone on this journey with me because
Mhm.
we used to read back and forth to each other and critique, and that was always helpful. So I'm just now trying to get the book out there to the right people, and it doesn't necessarily have to be people with MS.
Mhm.
There's so many people out there that have long-term diseases, and they face a lot of the same things, maybe just
Right.
different symptoms. And
Mhm.
and I just think it's really important to learn to accept, like I said, that that's such a big thing, and try to figure out, okay, what do I do now?
Right,
And figure
exactly.
out what's going to make you happy and how you can survive. And so I'm hoping my message brings to most people.
Well, I think it's definitely a message of hope, and that's one of the things that I like to promote on this podcast is stories of hope. And even though this one may not have ended as you had
Yeah.
originally wanted it to, your experiences and your lessons that you learned, you are able to now pass on and share as a thriver with
Yes.
other
Yes.
people. And it's just such a blessing to be able to learn those things and then share them with others.
It is. And just as an example, I have a dear friend whose husband is in hospice right now, who happens to
Mhm.
be passing away. And bless her heart, she is just bound and determined that we'll eat better. We'll go for walks. We'll do this, we'll do that. And she just couldn't accept what the doctor told her, that, he only has so long. And so I sat her down one day and I just said, I know this is hard. I've been through this. And I said, you have to learn to accept what's happening. And she says,
Yes.
I know, I've been in denial. She says, I don't want him to go. And I said, of course you don't. Of course you don't. But I said, if this is what God wants from us, then we have to do the best we can to work past that. And she was much better after that. He's still hanging in there. And so is she, bless her heart. But I find myself doing that a lot with people if I know them, just trying to give them a little bit of hope and reassurance. And we have to just know they're going to a better place, and knowing they'll be with the rest of the family, and also the fact that hopefully they're looking over us all the time, taking care of us in our minds. So
Well, I really appreciate that you shared that and that you are sharing with other people and helping other people through this time that you had to experience as well. So, but I keep saying it's a blessing, but I think that's what it is. I
it
think
is, it's a blessing.
it's just a blessing. So, I know you told me that you're working on your website. So, is there any place that people can come find you and share in your journey?
Yeah, you can reach me on my I mean on my email right now. I will be having my website up again. I had some issues and I've had to redo it. But if you go to Paulette, Paulette .ren, REN, at gmail.com, you can reach me through that. And I am on Instagram and Facebook. And my book can be purchased through Amazon, Barnes and Noble, almost any bookstore can order it online. And so they could get it that way if they're interested in it. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll make sure to get some links in the show notes and definitely one for the book as well, so that people can learn more about your story. So
Thank you.
Paulette, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate your time, your willingness to share your story with everyone today.
Well, thank you, Heather. I appreciate you and I wish you the best of luck. And I just think you're doing a wonderful job doing these podcasts.
Oh,
So.
thank you. Thank you. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Paulette's book is called Stolen Moments, and that really makes sense. When you are the spouse of or family member of someone with a chronic or terminal illness, many moments of the future are stolen. But what about present moments? For Paulette, it was very important to practice acceptance. And that is a gift she is sharing with others today through her book and meeting with other people in similar situations. But as she was sharing, it occurred to me that if we sit in denial about our loved one or their situation, we allow the present moments to be stolen too. Life is a gift. And as she shared, Paulette and her husband experienced some very profound moments with each other, even as life was turning out differently than either of them expected. Each of them accepted what was happening and what the eventual result would be. They allowed themselves freedom, or they gave themselves the gift of that freedom to make the most of the life that they had left with each other and their children. And that truly is a gift. So this week, is there something in your life that maybe you're in denial about, something you're refusing to accept? What needs to happen for you to move from denial to acceptance? Something to think about this week. Until we meet again, armor up, fight the good fight, seek beauty, and make your words warrior words. God bless.